Hey everybody, welcome to episode 41 here on What About Therapy. I'm Enoch and Austin, and I'm a certified mindfulness life coach.
And I'm Austin Ivy, and I'm certified in the basics of acceptance and commitment therapy. And today, we're going to be finding out if you are addicted to your relationship and what that could look like. So join us on this episode of What About Therapy.
Let's talk about it.
Alrighty then, let's get right into it today.
You just did a massive head shake. You can't see it.
I don't know if you can hear that in the recording. We'll see. I was channeling my inner Ace Ventura, if anyone's ever seen that movie. But we're talking about codependency, which we coined, well, not we coined, but one of the articles that we found calls it relationship addiction. So there's a lot of, I guess there's a lot of information on this on like TikTok. I've seen a lot on TikTok about codependency, and it's like a word that I didn't know. It's a thing that I didn't know much about, and I heard a lot about it, and I thought I knew what it was. I was kind of right, but as I did some research, watched videos, read a little bit into it, some articles, I've learned a little bit more about it, and I know that Enoch knew a little bit about it as well, and so we're going to share our insight with you of what codependency is in a relationship. So,
darn right.
Yeah, we're just going to get right into it, and the articles that we found, that we read to get some information on this, come from verywellmind.com and the mental health, I think it's Mental Health America, national.org. So we're going to, as always, put those in the show notes if you want to go read them yourself. They're great resources. We highly recommend you read them yourself, but if you don't want to, we're going to give you the gist here. But getting right into the summary, this comes straight from the Mental Health America article. It says that codependency is an emotional and behavioral condition that affects an individual's ability to have a healthy, mutually satisfying relationship. It is also known as a relationship addiction, because people with codependency often form or maintain relationships that are one-sided, emotionally destructive, and or abusive. So a couple of things from that. Codependency isn't a diagnosable condition in any diagnostic manual in the ICD or the DSM. I don't think it is in the ICD. I know for sure it's not in the DSM. So you can't really be diagnosed with codependency. It's more like a behavioral criteria. Yeah. Like it's more of like a nuanced thing. But there is like dependent personality disorder that we'll probably talk about sometime in the future. That's one of the types of personality disorders, and it's kind of like this, but it's more of like a, I don't know, like a behavioral pattern that you can notice in yourself and put a name to it and kind of understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
And as we said before, one of the best ways to conceptualize it is by calling it a relationship addiction, because that's basically what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that conceptualizes this the best is relationship addiction, because we were trying to think of a way to phrase codependency that's easy to understand, that makes sense, and relationship addiction is the best one by far that we've come across.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and I think when I first thought of codependency anyway, I thought of things like being dependent on another person for something. So like being dependent kind of thing, you know? That's kind of the vibes you get from it. Codependency, you're dependent on another person to give you things and to run your life.
Yeah, I always kind of saw it as like a immaturity thing. Like you depend on your spouse for, or like the person in your relationship for, like your emotional stability and things like that. And you depend on them for your happiness, like everything, them in your life, you depend on them. And I guess in a way a little bit, but
kind of the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. And
it's weird.
The actual like term that we're talking about today is a little bit different than just depending on someone for your well-being. Like we just said, it's kind of the opposite, but that's a good way to look at it to get a little bit of an idea, and keep the idea of a relationship addiction in your mind as we talk about this, because as we talk about it more and paint the picture, you can see why it could be conceptualized as an addiction, because some of the symptoms, like quote unquote symptoms, or the behaviors that someone with codependency can get into are a lot like they would be treating a substance or some other addictive behavior like sex or gambling. So they treat their relationships like an addiction. So interesting idea, but hopefully that starts to make sense. That's the picture we're trying to paint as we go forward.
Yeah, and if you do want to avoid things like this, there is a book called How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk. And yes, it's not completely about codependency, but this will help you. That book talks about red flags to look for, not only in a partner, but in things that you do with that partner as well, that can cause you to become a codependent person or an addict to that relationship, which is interesting and fascinating, really. I mean, it's, yeah, it's awesome. Anyway, so this quote's from Very Well Mind, right? This one here?
Yeah, this one is, yeah.
Cool. So codependency is a circular relationship in which one person needs the other person, who in turn needs to be needed. The codependent person, known as the giver, feels worthless unless they are needed by and making sacrifices for the enabler, otherwise known as the taker. It's by Dr. Egselberg. What a name. It sounds like what's his name on Sonic? The bad guy.
I know who you're talking about.
He's like
Jim Carrey's character.
Eggman or something.
Yeah, I want to say Eggbird, but I know that's not right. But
that's what it made me think of.
Leave it in the comments if you're listening and you know.
Oh,
because I don't know.
Yeah. We'll have to look it up. But this, and we'll talk more about this in detail here in a minute, but this is really, I guess it's more apparent in relationships with narcissists, because the narcissists are just takers, right? They don't really give unless it's for something that they'll get. And usually codependency can be really hard to spot in other relationships if they're not in a relationship with a narcissist, because sometimes, a lot of the times even, the taker or the enabler sometimes doesn't know that they're enabling this person into this codependent relationship, and they're just kind of going with the flow. And if they don't know what that looks like, then sometimes they'll just keep on taking because the person keeps giving. And of course, the intent both ways can be good. It's like, I want to give this to you. And the person receiving will say, okay, I'll take it. I'm not going to say no. And so they can just get in that endless cycle of going on, which is fascinating. But you can see how we're getting more into this relationship addiction. How with any other drug, with any other substance, there's a cycle that you tend to fall into. Yeah. And this cycle of codependency, I love how Dr. Egselberg says it here. A person who's codependent needs another person who in turn needs to be needed, which is just, it goes back and forth, and it's wild.
Yeah, and you can kind of see like the drug in this, like addiction, whatever that's what you want to call it, is the dynamic of the relationship, where the person can become like a martyr or the savior or the, I don't know, insert term here. I like the word savior because that's like the kind of they put themselves into. They sacrifice themselves. They give themselves for the other person, and that in turn makes them feel good about themselves. That's where they find their feelings of self-worth, and we're going to talk about how that develops here in a minute.
Yeah, they're like, if I don't sacrifice, if I don't do something for that person, then they might leave, or they might not feel loved by me. So I need to sacrifice this, or I need to do this for that person, and put off my time, my things to do this for them. And I don't want to say they're really bad at self-care.
In a way.
But they are. And they have good intentions, right? Because they want to sacrifice the part of themselves for the other person that they love. But you can see how that's just really unhealthy when you neglect yourself. And if you do that for long enough, that's just going to cause issues.
Yeah, it messes up the dynamic. And like one other thing that I wanted to touch on is that I think like most cases you're going to find some type of narcissistic trait, like how you were bringing up, that there's going to be some type of that going on with the taker. And I think it's also important to know that you can find codependent traits. You might have full-blown codependency in your relationship, but I found, as I've researched this and I've reflected on myself, I have a lot of codependent traits in some ways, like especially with the symptoms that we're about to go over. I have some codependent traits, and I recognize that, and then I kind of worked that back a little bit further and realized that it has made some negative impacts on the dynamic of my relationship, especially when I was first married. It's gotten better since then, but and I kind of worked through it without even knowing it, I guess. It just kind of came with working on the marriage. But maybe as you're listening and you're in a relationship, either that be like engagement, marriage, maybe even this can be between a boss and an employee as well, or a parent and a child. If you are codependent on let's say you are codependent on your parent, or vice versa, and so it can be in any relationship, and it doesn't have to be full-blown codependency for it to have an effect on your relationship.
Right, for it to cause issues.
Yeah, the same type of negative effects that full-blown codependency could have. Yeah. So just wanted to point that out. But what does it look like, you might be asking? Well, we're going to tell you. We have a few here, just a few bullet points that we're going to blow through. But the first one, these all come from the Very Well Mind article. The first, I guess, symptom or trait that comes with codependency is that the codependent person has a sense of walking on eggshells around the person to avoid conflict. And so they don't want to get into a tiff or a tussle or an argument.
Right.
And so they're going to walk on eggshells and be very careful about what they say and what they do around the other person, so they don't bring something up that is going to maybe take away their relationship, So
yeah, because they want that person to have the best life possible, to be having a great day. And so if there's something that the codependent person wants to bring up that could cause issues, they tend to just shove it underneath the bed and don't talk about it.
Be very careful what they say so as to not bring that up. So
right.
The walking on eggshells. Yeah.
Don't want to cause any hard feelings or anything and bring up any tension. Avoid that. And so they'll do anything to get around it. Yep.
Yeah, to maintain unhealthy homeostasis.
To maintain the peace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff there.
Yeah. So the next one here is feeling the need to check in with the other person and or ask permission to do daily tasks. And I've had this happen in my life. I think, as I'm going through this, I'm thinking, have I done something like this? And I would think so. I mean, at some points in my life, I did feel like I need to ask permission to do something, whether that be, I don't know what a good example is. Have 30 minutes to play some video games.
For me, it would be to go fishing. Like if I wanted to go fishing, ask my wife for permission.
Yeah.
As an independent adult male to go fishing.
Right. Yeah. Or to go to the gym or to do things for you. You kind of feel some tension around that to ask, hey, can I go do this for me? And the codependent person doesn't want to do that because, hey, that could cause some tension, that could cause problems, and that would make my partner's life miserable, and they wouldn't be having the greatest day. So I'm just not gonna go there.
Yeah. I think that's a big one too. Like that's one that I noticed for myself, and I still have this problem. Like I like to go fishing. We talked about this a lot on the podcast.
He's a fisher.
I feel the need to ask permission.
Bedtime.
To go to bed. No, to go fishing, and it's mainly out of respect, of course, because if my wife wants to spend time with me or has other plans for us that I didn't know about, I want to make sure that I respect her time and her wishes for our relationship, I guess. And I guess it's grown to that more, but at first it was like I feel like I needed to ask permission as to avoid her having negative feelings towards me in any way.
Yeah.
And it's more from that. More of it's a respect thing. But like I said, when we first got married, I was afraid that I was going to cause a problem, and I feel like I needed to ask her permission as if like an elementary school kid asked permission to go to the bathroom. Super dependent and the opposite of independent in that way, I guess. So that's kind of how it looked for me. Maybe it looks different for you, and it is a trait of codependency. The next one here says that the codependent person is often being the one who apologizes even if you have done nothing wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge culprit of this, just to avoid the negative feelings that might come up. Even if they're wrong, you still apologize to avoid an argument, to avoid a tiff. Right. And I feel like that's a natural thing too, like to avoid that tension, you just apologize. And it's interesting to see that it is a trait of codependency.
Yeah, and I feel like this is something that's coming up more and more these days, is you don't need to apologize if you didn't do anything wrong. Mm-hmm. I think I'm seeing more of that.
It's very important.
Anyway, yeah. But I definitely know a lot of people that apologize and they didn't do anything wrong, just trying to keep that peace. And obviously there are, I would argue there are certain situations to where, sure, like the Bible, agree with your enemy to avoid tension,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But if you do that over and over again, that'll cause codependency, which will over time build up and hurt you because you'll start feeling bad for yourself for doing nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And you fall into that, like, you'll fall into that victim mode.
Yeah, I think you
know?
point out something really important is that there's nothing wrong with saying sorry, even if it isn't your
Right.
fault. Like, because not everything is one person's fault. There's always something you could have done better. So apologizing isn't always inappropriate, even if it's not your fault. But you shouldn't be doing it if it's affecting you negatively.
Right.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Like, apologizing is going to affect you negatively, especially when you're in the wrong. It's going to hurt you a little bit. But if you're constantly doing that, especially when you're in the right or when you've done nothing wrong, that's going to cause some real issues. So it can't be at the behest of your own mental health to always be apologizing. And that's going to be the case with a lot of these symptoms, or whatever you want to call them. If you do it every now and then, that's fine. Everyone does it. But when it starts to take chips away at your own mental health or at the relationship itself, and it starts to cause problems, that's how you know you're starting to get into the codependency rather than just the natural relationship dynamics.
Right. Yeah, and you put this one in a relationship with a narcissist. The narcissist is going to use this to gaslight the heck out of you.
Mm-hmm.
When all you do is apologize, they're going to keep gaslighting you in those certain situations because they know that you're going to keep that peace and say, I'm sorry, it was my fault, even though it wasn't. And so the narcissist will do what they can to take advantage of you in that way and make you apologize so they don't have to.
Yeah, gaslight central.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. The next one here is the codependent person does anything for the other person, even if it makes them feel uncomfortable. That one's an interesting one.
Yeah, I could think of like, especially if your partner knows like that you don't like doing something specifically, and they ask you to do it, and they push you to do it. Think about the narcissistic personality thing.
Yeah, because they know you'll do it.
Yeah, and they take advantage of you as the giver, or even in a non-narcissistic relationship. If they don't know that you're uncomfortable with the thing or doing something for them, and instead of asserting yourself and saying no, you just kind of swallow it and say, yeah, of course I'll do it, just because you want them to have the perfect life, right? Going back to that codependency trait, to feel that way. And that's kind of what I thought when I saw that you would do anything and everything for that person, even if it is at the behest of your own well-being.
Right. Yeah, it's like, I don't know if you've seen that picture where there are two people made out of puzzle pieces, and one, the giver, is giving, like, the picture is this person that's giving has a bunch of missing puzzle pieces, and they're giving pieces to this other person who has all the pieces, isn't missing a piece.
Yeah, it's a completed puzzle.
Or maybe he's missing one.
Mm-hmm.
And so the codependent person gives the giver, or the codependent person is the giver. So they give the taker these puzzle pieces they don't need, and they just keep on giving, which at the consequence of they're losing themselves as they keep on giving.
Yeah, I've seen another one where it was like two fish bowls right next to each other, and the fish bowl, and there was like a straw connecting the two, and the fish bowl on the left is like almost overflowing or like completely full, and the fish bowl on the right is like the fish blowing or pushing water from his bowl into the other bowl, and he's almost running out of water, and you can see like the distress on his face.
Yeah.
Or her.
Its
face. It's a fish. Who cares? You can see the distress on its face, and you can. That's kind of like a good way to, I guess, visualize it. That it's putting the mask on the person next to you before yourself in the event of a loss of cabin pressure on an airplane. You know, like that whole thing that you always have to put the mask on yourself. Codependent person is always going to be focused on mask on the other person, water on the other bowl, puzzles to the other person, even if I need those puzzle pieces. And so, and again, we keep going back to this, and that's not always a bad thing. That it shows empathy and love, but it is unhealthy and ruins the relationship dynamic when it starts to take away from your mental health and well-being.
Yeah, he's like Future, the rapper. Mask off.
Mask. Forgot about that.
Mask off.
Mask off.
They don't want that mask on. They give the masks to other people.
Just everyone have a mask.
So Future could be codependent.
Maybe he is.
That could be a little
You heard it here first, folks.
Easter egg there.
Future is codependent. Official diagnosis, not really. Next symptom here, next trait, is that the codependent person will put the other person on a pedestal. Despite the fact that they don't merit this position. So I guess the phrase that might be used is perfect, like you see the other person as perfect, or
they don't have any problems.
Yeah, flawless.
I'm the only ones with the problems.
Yeah, I'm the problem in the relationship.
I'm ugly, they're not.
Yeah, they never cause problems in the relationship. They never start the arguments. I always do, and so I need to do better.
It's always my fault.
It's always my fault. Yeah, lots of I'm sorry's involved. So going back to the few symptoms ago. So that's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
But it happens a lot in codependent relationships.
The last one here is a need for other people to like you in order to feel good about yourself. And this one is probably the most apparent in almost everybody's life at one point or another, especially through high school, you know?
Yeah.
You have to have people to like you before you even feel good about yourself, because if no one likes you, then you're ugly. You're fat. You're too skinny. And so you need that validation from other people. Obviously, validation's important. But at the end of the day, you're always going to be here for you, and you need to love yourself first before anyone else loves you. And the codependent person is dependent on the person they're in a relationship with to validate that, pause. My tongue got a little caught there. To validate the codependent person in how they look, feel, sound. Mm-hmm. Going with it.
Just go for it, yeah.
Go for it. But, yeah, I mean, they're always looking for validation. And when they don't get it, they fall into that, whether that be depression, anxiety, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. And they just kind of get into that negative feedback loop.
Almost like a relationship withdrawal. They're not getting what they need from the relationship. So, and that is the validation that comes from being in a relationship. And so they're not getting that, like the faux withdrawals of being in that addicted relationship. Just going back to that analogy is helpful.
Right, but here's the thing. With people that are codependent, they don't just change or leave the relationship if they're not getting it. They stay, which why I think the term relationship addiction is a great name for it, because they stay, they put that person on the pedestal, and they blame themselves over and over again, apologizing over and over again. It's always their fault. So why would they leave a relationship when it's not the other person's fault? They're great, they're awesome. It's my fault. And I need to stay, because if I leave, this other person is going to be really sad.
Yeah.
And not have a great day, not have a good life because of me. So I'll just stay.
And you can see how that could be dangerous for like a narcissistic relationship where where the taker is an actual narcissist or has some intense narcissistic traits, because they're just going to play into that and manipulate them. And you could even get into infidelity, that like, if let's say the other person, the taker, cheats, and let's say the giver stays in the relationship because they see that as their fault, because they're the codependent in the relationship. And I'm not to say that happens all the time, but it could, and you can see how that could lead to that, and how this codependency could lead to an unhealthy attachment to the person, like the taker. And like we said earlier, sometimes takers aren't necessarily narcissists. They're just unaware of the fact that their spouse or their person, or the person they're in a relationship with, is codependent and is a giver, and so they just kind of play into the taker trait without even knowing it. And so you have to be careful. And if you feel like maybe your spouse is a giver or a codependent person, it's important for you to be aware of the signs that they're showing as a codependent person, so you don't unawaringly.
I think so. Sounds right.
We'll go with it.
Yeah.
You are unaware of the fact that you are playing into the maybe narcissistic taker trait.
Right.
Where you are taking advantage of your person because of their ability and their willingness to just give themselves up for you and sacrifice for you. And so because I don't want to paint every person who's a taker in a relationship, codependent relationship, as a narcissist, but I'm sure there's plenty of those for sure.
Right.
But just for any one of those who may feel like their spouse or maybe boyfriend, girlfriend is codependent, it goes back to the empathetic grace. Just be aware of the fact that they have this problem and don't take advantage of them.
Right.
Because it'd be easy to.
Yeah, just take inventory, see how you respond to those situations, and if your spouse or the person you're in a relationship with is a giver, and you realize that, oh crap, I've only been taking,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been giving. That's okay. You can change, notice, recognize it, and start to give back as well, and not just take. Because, I mean, it can be easy to fall into that because it's nice, it's luxury.
Yeah, they're just willing to do anything for you.
Willing to do everything,
Yeah.
yeah. And they'll give you whatever they want, whatever you want, do whatever you want to do, and they'll just go with it. And so I've definitely fallen into that trap as well.
Me too.
Because my wife loves to do things for me all the time. And she's not saying she's codependent at all. She's just very empathetic and very giving. And I've fallen into that trap of, nice, cool, we'll do everything I want to do because she'll do it, you know?
Yeah.
And we've had awesome talks about this actually in the past of that we also need to do things that she wants to do,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so that's something that we still work on. So
Yeah, and it's a learning curve.
Yeah.
And
it's great.
it's not easy either.
Right.
But I guess now getting into how it develops, maybe you might be wondering, how does this even happen to a person? Where does this stem from?
I was thinking that same question.
I definitely was. Let's talk about that. And we talked about this earlier, but it comes from the article again, that codependency is not a clinical diagnosis. There's no formal categorization as a personality disorder. There's a dependent personality disorder, but it is different from codependency. But continuing on with the quote from the article, generally speaking, codependency incorporates aspects of attachment style patterns developed in early childhood, and it can also overlap with other personality disorders, including dependent personality disorder. And I guess we brought that up a lot already, but it can also stem from dysfunctional family dynamics where problems are never discussed and or repressed, and those problems are repressed. And it really goes back to the attachment style that you as a child or a codependent person develops as a child and becomes codependent, I guess, on a parent in a way, and they just that becomes their almost like an ego defense mechanism, and a way to defend themselves is to be a martyr and to be always giving. That's how they find praise as a child, and that's how they saw that modeled maybe by a parent, or they had that type of dynamic with a parent where their attachment or their feelings of worth came from sacrificing as a child, and so it just continues on through adulthood. Like most problems or personality disorders, it stems from childhood. So Freud was onto something, I guess. But
onto something, Mr. Freud.
Mr. Freud, Mr. Sigmund. But that's kind of where it stems from. There's not much beyond that it really comes from childhood and attachment.
Yeah, I think it mostly would come from the anxious attachment style.
Yeah, definitely.
To where you want to avoid those anxious feelings that you've developed in your family. And so the way you do that is you attach to someone in a relationship, and you do everything you can to avoid those anxious feelings that you did feel as a child. And so you do that as being a giver, which is not a bad thing. But when you do it over and over again, then that's when it becomes an issue. I mean, that's this thing with anything, really, is too much of anything is a problem. So too much giving, that's going to be an issue if you're not receiving.
That's like a theme of the episode so far, yeah.
Yeah.
It conceptualizes it really well.
Because you can give all you want as long as you're also receiving. But if you're giving a ton and not receiving, that's when it becomes a problem. It's that puzzle piece or that fishbowl analogy.
Yeah,
picture.
You're giving way too much water to the other fish, and it's at your own detriment.
Yep. Now, you're probably saying, Enoch, Austin, but what can be done about it? How can I get help? I think I'm codependent. Fear no more. I think of Metro Man in Megamind when he says that random citizen's like, I love you, Metro Man. He's like, I love you too, random citizen. So for you random citizens out there, there's a solution. There's help for you. I know you're probably saying right now, I love you, Enoch and Austin.
I hope so.
We love you too, random citizen. So the first step, this is from Very Well Mind, is the first step in reducing codependent tendencies is to focus on self-awareness. Pretty obvious.
Yeah.
This can be done on your own, of course, but Dr. Mayfield also stresses the importance of therapy to help you really unravel your codependent tendencies. I think this is therapy is a great resource for codependency because you have a third party, someone to look from a non-biased perspective and tell you, okay, this may be a little more on the codependent side that you're doing. And they'll just be able to give you more perspective that you may not be able to see. And doing that with your spouse or someone that would probably have a little more bias, it can be difficult.
Yeah.
To talk about your codependency traits and help you recognize them when they're probably going to have some more bias on their side.
Yeah, and even just unknowingly too. Like
Right.
They won't recognize the fact that you're giving so much and they're taking. Especially if it's like a non-narcissistic person. They're just going to be like, well, or a narcissistic either way. It could just be like they won't recognize it like, well, I didn't feel this way, but maybe you do feel this way. And so therapy could be good for couples or individual, just to help talk you through, like you said, pointing out codependent traits. Like, yeah, this is codependency. We should work on this. And so the article gives some really great insights, just a few from the article that we took. This is my personal favorite one that I feel like has helped me with my codependent traits. It says to take small steps towards some separation in the relationship. Seek activities outside of the relationship and invest in new friendships. Focus on figuring out the things that make you who you are and then expand upon them. And we always shout out Tony Overband's podcast, and he has some really great insight on this on his podcast. And he talks about the term interdependence. The opposite of codependence is interdependence, and that is two mature, responsible adults living parallel lives, basically. That you rely on each other and are dependent on each other in the way that, like, two countries are dependent on each other to trade food and resources and energy, and like it's just a give and a take, back and forth. Like, I buy your thing from you and you take my product from me, like an economy does. And so it's like an economy, like a good give and take, where there's an exchange, not like a transactional relationship because that's different.
Right.
But you have a symbiotic relationship where you rely on one another in a healthy way. And so like you give and take each other in good constructive ways rather than the giver and the taker that we just talked about. And so this has helped me, like, being okay with going fishing, and my wife becoming okay with doing things by herself, like working out when I don't want to work out because I have a hard time working out. And I've had a hard time saying no to her, and I think she has a hard time saying no to me when I've asked her to go fishing with me, and I think she has a hard time saying no to that. And I think that's our codependent trait a little bit, that we just have a hard time saying no to each other and letting each other live their own lives.
Yeah.
And I think that's a hard thing to do because you, especially as a new married couple, I found this with my wife, that you just want to be with them and you feel like you have to be with them. And don't get me wrong, I do. But as we talked about, you can see how that tendency or that habit can lead to just codependency, where you just rely on each other and you both kind of become givers, or one becomes a giver and one becomes a taker, and you just give way too much. And so, yeah, just focusing on becoming a symbiotic, interdependent relationship where you live closely intertwined but still parallel lives.
Yeah, I love that. I'm glad you brought that up because I think, that's definitely something that we're going to talk about more on the podcast in the future.
Yeah.
Probably, I can see the future. Episode 42, Interdependence. If you want to know what that is, go listen to episode 42.
Boom, boom, boom.
Next week, of course, because it's not even out. But I think interdependence is such a beautiful thing because when people think of relationships, they think of always relying on that person for your happiness. Because there's a ton of videos on Instagram that are just, they're good-intentioned videos. But they say, like, it's dramatic, beautiful music in the background. It's like when you can't do anything without your significant other, your loved one. and you want to do anything for them all the time. You know, something like that. Exactly, not exactly that, but you get what I'm saying. And then it's like, oh my gosh, that's so heartwarming. Yes. Like, sure, but no, at the same time. Like, you need to do things by yourself for you. You still come first. Put the mask on yourself before you help other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's including in your relationship. Now, in an interdependent relationship, both of you will put your mask on at the same time with each other. And then you can go about doing whatever you want because you both have your masks on because you're both independent.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a weird concept, interdependence, but again, we'll break it down in the future. Anyway, so the next little step you can do here is become president of your own fan club. I love this. Learn to speak lovingly and positively to yourself and resist the impulse to self-criticize, says Dr. Exelbert. Clutch, Dr. Exelbert.
Always coming in.
But get yourself a shirt that says, vote for your name.
Vote for Pedro.
That's exactly just like Napoleon Dynamite. Be your own president. Make your own shirts. Self-care. We've said it several times. Self-care isn't selfish.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a relationship, you need to take care of yourself. You come first. And I love what Dr. Exelbert says here is learn to speak lovingly and positively to yourself. And I would add, be patient with yourself. And yeah, say no more. There you go. That's what I have on that.
Yeah, find ways to be healthily proudful of who you are.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Like, and that's hard for me to obtain. And I feel like, I don't know if that's like a middle child trait or whatever it is. I just had that hard time my whole life being okay with being my own fan and like
and what you like to do.
Sing my own praises, I guess.
Yeah.
In a healthy way because
Right.
we're not going to get into narcissism. But yeah, that's okay to do that. And I think it's healthy. And I'm not the biggest fan of positive affirmations all the time, but I think at the basis and foundation of what they are, I think positive affirmations can be beneficial in building up some self-love for who you are.
Yeah.
And to not change thoughts and to not to change feelings, but to build some self-worth and to have a better self-concept. So, and it kind of goes into the last thing that you can do to help with your codependency, if you do have it or if you have some traits, is to find ways to stand up for yourself if someone criticizes you or undermines you or tries to control you. And that's just like an overall, like the foundation of what codependency is not being able to stand up for yourself and putting yourself second. Yeah. And that's just like an exercise that you can do. If you're codependent, you're likely to not stand up for yourself. I know that I'm somewhat codependent. I wouldn't say full-blown codependency, but I have the traits and I have a hard time standing up for myself. And so some of you might as well if you feel like you have those codependent traits. So that's something that you could focus on outside of your marriage. That if someone is criticizing you at work, or if you have a friend that undermines you, or a coworker that undermines you, you can stand up for yourself and practice that. And that might help you build the relationship, or I guess the strength that you need to implement that into your relationship. Because I know as a codependent person, it might be hard to imply that into your relationship if you're terrified of losing the relationship. So maybe try it outside of the codependent relationship in question, like work and things like that.
Yeah, take little baby steps.
Yeah, practice ways to become more resilient, more I'm trying to think of the word, I can't find it, but standing up for yourself. There's a word for that, don't know what it is. Being able to do so is going to be a big trait of importance. I'm losing my words now. I'm getting tired. It's going to be important to you on your path to healing from codependency to stand up for yourself.
Right. Yeah, and I think the unfortunate thing is standing up for yourself is society views this as you're being selfish, you're being mean, that either you don't want to do what I do, or like if someone says, for instance, we just taught a class tonight, Guiding Good Choices, on refusal skills. Someone says, hey man, let's go smoke a cigarette. You say, you know, I'm actually not going to because that's something that I've decided that I'm not going to do in my life. And a lot of the times, honestly, that's viewed as being rude or mean.
Like culturally, yeah.
Yeah, to the other person that's offering you this thing. And they're saying, oh, what, you think you're better than me? Like, no. I'm just standing up for myself. I'm being confident in who I am, confident in my values, confident in what I want in life. And so again, it's going to feel really uncomfortable when you stand up for yourself. Even if you're not a codependent person, I think all of us at times have a hard time standing up for ourselves. And it's going to feel awkward, and it's going to feel like you're doing something wrong when you stand up for yourself. But you're not. You are, again, protecting yourself. You come first. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, that's selfish. Like, it's not. It's being confident in who you are. It's called boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And you deserve it. And it's going to feel a little weird, a little awkward, but like anything, if you just practice, it's going to feel more natural. It'll come to you easier, and you'll be more confident in standing up for yourself.
Here's an exercise for you. I just thought of this on the spot.
Oh, let's hear it.
We can end it out with this.
I'm excited.
Me as a putting myself last type of person, always have been that way.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's not a bad thing, but if you're a codependent person and you want to have an exercise to stand up for yourself and to put yourself out there as an important figure in the world rather than just a sacrificial lamb that you sacrifice yourself to make other people happy.
Yeah.
What you could do maybe is the next time you're at a function, family function or a work function where there is a line to get food, put yourself in the front of the line. Go get food first. Because as a person, for me, who always puts myself last, I always wait till everyone else is eaten.
Mm-hmm.
And the food's cold and everything. And I do that just because I feel like I'm being cordial, respectful, and make sure everyone gets food before I do. But you could say that as a codependent trait, where I'm making sure other people are happy before I'm happy. Other people are fed before I'm fed.
You always get the cold food.
Yeah, and again, this is not a bad thing, but if you want an exercise to try to focus on putting yourself first and in a healthy way, or just a way to do it, don't wait to be the last person in line. Jump right in when they say the food's ready. Be the first person in line. As just a way to practice that skill of standing up for yourself and saying, I do deserve food. I deserve for it to be warm and to get exactly what I want and not have anyone else, not to be gone since I'm the last person. And do it a couple of times. And I don't know, if you want to go back to that at some point in your life where you want to be the last person, because you just like being respectful for other people and you like making sure other people enjoy themselves. Every now and then, that's fine. Good exercise to do. I would say try that out.
Yeah.
I kind of did that tonight with our little guiding good choices thing.
Yeah, we did.
Instead of waiting for everyone to get there to get their food, like we usually do, we just hopped in line and got food and started eating, and it was fine. Nobody died. Everyone got food, and
no
everything
one was
fine.
Judging us,
and it was okay. And so the same thing's going to be for you. Maybe try that out the next time there's a line to get food that has been prepared for you. Don't wait so long as you
jump right in.
Do. Stand up for yourself to know that you're just as worthy as anybody else to get food very first.
Mm-hmm.
So, little goofy exercise, but try it out.
I love that. Yeah. I feel weird just thinking about doing it.
Yeah, I got anxious thinking about it.
Yeah.
I did tonight too, but try it out, and hopefully you learned something. If you did, and you feel like maybe someone you know could learn from or appreciate this episode, share it with them. Leave a rating and review. If you're listening on Spotify, maybe try going to the top of the page, leaving a rating. Tell us what you really think. If it's 1 star, leave 1 star. If it's 5 stars, leave 5 stars. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And we're always able to be reached out to on social media, on Instagram. So shoot us a DM, What About Therapy, and we'll get back to you. So hopefully you guys learned something. Hopefully you enjoyed. And we will talk to you, or be talking at you, next week. Have a good one.
What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? Yeah. What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? Yeah. What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy?